Software Engineering Radio, Episode 90, ProductLine Engineering Part 3 with Charles Krüger. This is Software Engineering Radio, the podcast for professional developers, on the web at se-radio.net. SE Radio brings you relevant and detailed discussions and interviews on software engineering topics every 10 days. Thanks to our audience and the partners listed on our website for supporting the podcast. Hi everybody, welcome to Software Engineering Radio. Before we get to the actual content of this episode, I do have a couple of announcements. Just some quick reminder that you should go to seradio.net and click on the on the link on the left side, the Get Together link. The Get Together is the open space conference we're organizing together with D. and EX, the German IT magazine. Go to the website, look at the nice PDF we put together with all the details, and we would like to see you there. It's important for SE Radio to be mentioned on sites like Reddit, Dig, Delicious, or Slashdot. We have put those special shortcut links into each episode page, so you just have to click there. So you would really do us a great favor if you'd make SE Radio more well known by mentioning those certain episodes on those pages and also voting them up, because most of these pages obviously work by social bookmarking or other Web 2.0 facilities, so people have to vote for the content. So if one person just submits it and then nothing else happens, it's not very useful. So please help us make this stuff more well known, vote these things up, and if you like them, of course, we don't ask you to vote for crap, and you should only vote for the good episodes, the ones you like best. Okay, and here is the actual episode.
My name is Michael, and my guest today is Charles Krüger. Charles Krüger is a big member of the Software Product Lines community. And Charles, why don't you introduce yourself a bit to our listeners?
Okay, thank you, Michael. So I am currently the CEO of Big Lever Software, founder of that company as well. We focus entirely on software product line development technology and methodologies. We've been doing that work for about 6 years now, and focused on commercial practice and commercial deployments.
Okay, and your own background in software product lines, is that the same as the company existed, or what is your personal history with ProductLine Engineering?
So it all started back in the late 80s, early 90s in my graduate research. So I was very interested in software reuse and the technologies around that. And my PhD thesis work at Carnegie Mellon was in what today might be called ProductLine Architectures. Back then it didn't have that name, but it was reusable and configurable software architectures. And that's ultimately where my interest started. After I got out of graduate school, worked in a couple of commercial companies, applied some of the ideas, and a couple of them worked better than you might expect. And eventually those good ideas that were working well in practice were what turned into the company.
You mentioned the term product line architecture. I always wondered, what is really a product line architecture? I like much more the term reference architecture. Do you distinguish those two? What do you think about this term product line architecture, and what does it mean to you?
So product line architecture, certainly the idea of being focused in a specific product domain, application domain is the idea there. Reference architecture is probably a term that's been used longer. Sometimes that reference architecture can be more of a generic architecture that might be used across many application domains, whereas product line architectures tend to be narrowly focused on a very specific portfolio of products within a single domain. But similar intent for sure.
And what does a product line architecture, what is it different from a regular architecture?
The product line architecture will look identical to a regular architecture except for the notion of variation or diversity. So what you want to accommodate in your product line architecture is the ability to say, here's a part of the architecture that will vary among different products within a portfolio, and the ability to have optional structures within your architecture, or structures that may come in different flavors depending on the product that you're building.
I guess this can be pretty difficult. I mean, if you imagine that you have really different, very different products that you derive from this product line architecture, and you need to document all the variabilities and all the options. Are there any best practices? Have you seen them around in industry?
Usually what happens is if you find the diversity is becoming too much, there's too much variation, what you may find is that you actually have two product lines or multiple product lines, and a lot of times what you'll want to do is go to what's referred to as a product population, where you have multiple families living together, if you will, but you then would go to multiple product line architectures that may have more similarity internally within them, and then have a family of those architectures that are a population of those architectures that ultimately have some sharing as well. Mm-hmm. But if the commonality, if the common parts of that architecture are not high enough, then you're not going to gain the benefits of the reuse and that commonality. Ultimately, that's the goal, is to benefit from what's common and have very manageable levels of variability within there.
Is there any rule of thumb about the commonality that you need to have so that the product line architecture or product line approach actually makes sense?
What we find, and this is maybe more towards the implementation level, but if you look at how many common files or common modules versus how much, what percentage of the files or modules within a system may vary, we usually find that 75-80% is a pretty typical number. So if you have less than that, if I see somebody that's got less than 50% commonality within architecture or within a set of implementation assets, then I start to worry a little bit that the reuse levels are not high enough and there may be some issues. So we look for ways of maybe refactoring or repartitioning or dividing into multiple product lines to get those numbers closer to 75 or 80 or 90%.
An interesting and challenging question that I raised already several times in the past was, well, what is, in your opinion, the key difference between software product line engineering and regular software engineering? Is product line engineering just software engineering done right? What is different? How would you differentiate the two terms, practices?
Okay, definitely a good question. The way we like to look at it is you do your product line engineering in exactly the way you would manage the entire life cycle of doing development, software engineering on a single system. But at every stage within that life cycle, you now need to consider the concept of variability and diversity. And so if you start at requirements, then go through your architecture, design, implementation, test cases, documentation, deployment, whatever your life cycle may be for your software assets and your software development, if at every stage in the life cycle you can accommodate the variability and relate the variability among the different stages in the same way that you would do your traceability for conventional software development, then it all of a sudden becomes very similar to developing software in a very traditional, conventional way. So again, it's all about very effectively managing that variability at every stage in the life cycle.
So is the consequence that we don't need any additional technologies and processes to accomplish succeeding in product line engineering, or do we need them? What is like your reasoning here?
So the reason that our company exists, we have a tool called Gears that provides the variability management in software assets. In the early stages of trying these ideas and in my thesis and the first commercial deployments, we tried to use conventional technologies such as configuration management branching or conditionals through if-defs or runtime conditionals and configuration files. It turns out that conventional technology, trying to then mix in the variability management with these conventional software management techniques, creates a lot of complexity. So ultimately what we found is there's a hole in our existing tool set and methodology in software development. And so, the reason the company exists is we created a tool to fill that gap.
So you have many customers all over the world, and what is the state of industry regarding ProductLine engineering? What is common practice today out there?
The idea of creating a portfolio of products is not new by any means, and it's not a concept that comes out of the engineering department. The business groups, the marketing, the sales group, all want to have diversity and variations within a product line in order to sell more into more markets and to ultimately make more money. So the engineering groups in response have applied conventional techniques to the best of their ability and to the best practices, but ultimately that's not sufficient. So the companies that are doing the best, take a first-class method and first-class technology for dealing with product line approach. But most of the companies we go into are, again, using things like the if-defs or configuration management branches. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Those are what we have in our toolbox today, and that's what people use, and they use those things very well. But they scale well to, maybe 10, 15, or 20 products within a portfolio. Then the complexity starts to ramp up pretty steeply. And so that's what we find, state of the practice. Everybody's doing portfolios of products. Companies typically are feeling a lot of pain and spending a lot of time and energy on the overhead of managing the engineering of a portfolio and that diversity.
So, and your approach is to solve this complexity and succeed in ProductLine engineering with a technology and tool approach. What about organizational issues? What about management issues? What about process issues? Do you have any impact there? Do you have any suggestions on those areas?
So we've have what we call a 3-tiered software product line methodology that provides a simple framework for describing methods, processes, tools, techniques, and a way of capturing best practices that provides that level of guidance. We're learning, as we go. This is still an emerging field, I would say, and so we have customers having very good success, and every time we go in and look at what's working well or where they're having challenges in deploying their product lines, we'll capture that in the methodology.
So the 3-tier approach contains management guidance here and process guidance, suggestions on how to deal with that?
Yes. So the first tier of the methodology primarily focuses on infrastructure, technology, how to integrate variability management in with configuration management and build and those types of techniques. The second tier in the methodology is really where we start to look at the organizational and process issues. Top tier then is more business focused, and how do you get your business and your engineering organization working very efficiently together.
Yeah, best practices on those areas. Could you name one? Some examples.
Let's look at the middle tier, for example. So once you do have a very good technology base in place for managing your diversity, then we go into what's called core asset focused development. So the traditional way of managing product portfolio deployments is you have a team of people that's focused on the release schedule and getting products out the door at a particular time, and so the organization is all around the life cycle of individual products. You'll tend to have teams clustered around products. What we do is sort of flip that 90 degrees and say what you really want to do is have all of your organizational structures focused around the reusable subsystems, what are referred to as the core assets, and have no development teams focused on the individual products. So the actual deployment of the products is managed through automatic configuration of products from core assets.
So then if I understand that correctly, you totally focus on the core assets. You have some derivation rules that you store in your tool, and you then derive the products from it. So what stays after this derivation? When you deliver it to the customer, how do you know what actually you deliver to the customer? Do you keep a configuration file or some the rules around in configuration management? What is the asset that you keep of a specific product then?
Yeah, so in the traditional way of doing a single product, what you would do is have for example, a configuration management label or a baseline that you would remember, and that way you can go back and reproduce that product. Every file, every byte within every file is 100% reproducible. When you have core assets from which you're deriving products, now you need an additional step. You take your baseline of your core assets that still have the diversity in them. Then you provide a specification, what we call a feature profile, that says here's the optional features we want in, here's the ones we don't want, those features that come in different flavors, here's the particular flavor of that feature we're interested in. And if you take a feature profile, apply it to a baseline of core assets from configuration management, that takes you right back to the same scenario where you can reproduce every byte of every file that gets deployed to a customer. So you get that 100% reproducibility again.
The listeners might remember our first episode on ProductLine Engineering. And in this first episode, Marcus and I had a discussion about problem and solution space and how to make the hop from the problem space, from the requirements to the solutions, how to do the traceability. Charles, what is your advice on how to tie the requirements, the variability in the requirements with the variability in the solution? How do you trace these requirements then in the solution?
So if you have well-defined variation, what we call variation points within your requirements, so you identify and encapsulate, here's a requirement that comes in different ways for different products, and then have those variation points that exist all the way through the entire life cycle, you can add your traceability in the same way that you would in conventional software. So a variation point within your requirements will trace to one or more variation points within your architecture, which will trace to one or more variation points within your implementation. So you'll have a many-to-many relationship between each stage in your life cycle, and in the same way that you do your traceability among the common parts of your requirements and architectures and designs and implementations, same way within the diversity, and you can use the identical sets of techniques. So what you need then is this first-class notion of variation point at every stage in the life cycle.
I'm very used to feature models as they are, for example, provided by Christoph Czarnecki in his tooling. What is your approach different, or is it the same like feature models? What are the fundamental ideas of your approach compared to feature modeling?
So we follow the same paradigm. There will be a feature model. We use that term, feature model, for managing at that level of abstraction what is the diversity that exists within the portfolio. So one of the things that's slightly different with our approach is that we model only feature diversity and don't use the feature model to necessarily model all features that are both common and varying. So we're getting it down to the essence of making choices among a feature set that will help uniquely characterize each product. Our language for describing feature models is slightly different. We don't follow the FODA language directly. We use something that we find is more comfortable and familiar for developers. So we use things like set types and enumeration types and primitive types such as integers, strings, characters, booleans. So things that make it very easy for a developer to move from conventional development into software product line development. And then what I always do is go back and make sure that we're at least isomorphic with what Christoph is doing. I kind of use his work as a good standard. We want to make sure we can represent everything that can be represented in FODA or Christoph's approaches for feature modeling. And we tend to go beyond that as well and be able to represent more complex features and particularly the feature constraints and interactions.
Is there any integration of those two approaches that if people have already a feature model of their domain, how could they reuse it, for example, with the tooling that you suggest?
There is. So if you look at the various characterizations in a feature model tree or feature model diagram, you can pretty much look at every one of those levels and say, oh, this needs to be converted into a set or this needs to be converted to an enumeration. Ultimately, what we're doing right now, we're doing some work with Honeywell to produce a graphical representation of our language that will look very much like a traditional photo diagram. There are some people in their product marketing group there that prefer the diagrammatic graphical approach. They're not programmers, so they prefer to interact with the visual representations. So ultimately, there will be a way to look at those two things side by side, and they're going to look very similar.
Okay, including the hierarchy, because as I understand it, the feature models with the feature tree are typically hierarchies of variabilities, of variation points, and your language supports, as I understand it, a flat structure of variation points.
No, it will. The feature model in our world is definitely hierarchical. So you can have a set type, and then a member of that set could be a nested set, or it could be a nested enumeration. So anything that has multiple children can be nested. Ultimately, the leaves of that tree are the primitive types within the language. So you do have a tree structure there. Our notion of variation point, to sort of put a little differentiation in here, feature model for us is all about, again, managing feature diversity. So pretty much every feature in our feature model will be varying, will represent diversity. And then what we refer to as a variation point is at the implementation level. So we really don't talk about variation points within the feature model. We sort of assume all of that is varying and representing diversity. A variation point is at the next level below of abstraction, where you're modeling variation within some asset.
Okay. Is there any web resource available that the listeners could look up and follow your thoughts and ideas on this topic?
We have definitely a lot of resources on our website. So there's a sort of a learn more section there, so you can see online demos. We do live web seminars quite frequently. Many papers we've written on specific topics, white papers, case studies. So we're very informational in the way that we do our marketing within the company. It's all about doing information, particularly have a newsletter that goes out about once a month, and that's just the latest and absolute, most recent evolving experiences, concepts, case studies that are coming out. So that's a great way to really keep up with the leading edge of what we're learning and finding out.
We put the link into the show notes. Another topic, well, that's what I find one of the hardest topics is how to get started. I mean, many developers and many managers feel the need for a structured and systematic approach to product line engineering. But then the hard part is how to get started, how to get your organization convinced, how do you get your upper management convinced, how do you get the people convinced that are involved in configuration management, in the tooling, in the architecture, and everything. How do you start something like that?
Definitely it's a challenge because it's an emerging discipline is one of the challenges. People are not familiar with it. They haven't heard of it, or don't have experience with it. It looks like risk, and people tend to be averse to that. So you have to at least find one person within the organization who enjoys doing new things, new challenges, who tends to be bored with the way things are done and very dissatisfied with the complexity of conventional approaches. So you need a good individual that's going to champion the cause. We've really, I think, pioneered a lot of what we call the minimally invasive conversion techniques, transition techniques. So we look at how can you start with whatever you're doing today, legacy assets, legacy approaches, and make very small incremental steps that don't require a lot of change, a lot of time, a lot of money or effort, so that you can do something next week that will make you better off the following week. And we found some very good techniques for that. So our customers may invest, set aside 2 engineers for 2 months to start a transition process. At the end of those 2 months, they'll actually have a functioning product line infrastructure in place, addressing a very limited amount of the core assets or the existing legacy code. But once you take that first incremental step, you're a little bit better off. You can use your gains in productivity or whatever, then reinvest that into incrementally transitioning the next step. And we find that to be a very effective approach. So then it becomes less intimidating. You don't have to convince management to take these huge leaps of faith while you're investing, hundreds of man hours and man months of effort to try to make a transition.
On what parts of the system do you focus and what kind of assets? On the requirements first, or do you try to get some solution artifacts managed properly?
We go for where the pain is the worst. Where's the biggest problem? Where's the biggest opportunity for gains? A lot of times that's in the source code, right? That's where you've got the largest number of engineers, largest number of burn rate man hours going on every week, every month. So typically we'll focus on, let's take one subsystem and convert that into core assets, or let's take 2 products out of your portfolio and consolidate 2 products so that they work like a product line, and then incrementally transition in other products. So we find ways of saying, let's start with a small number of people, either focus on one subsystem or focus on small numbers of products and make the transition at that level. So it really, depends, but a lot of times we see people making transitions either around, here's one subsystem we think we can tackle without a lot of disruption, or here's a pair of products that we can start with. They're at the end of a release cycle, it may be another quarter or 6 months before they release again, so let's start working on those.
Pain indicators is another key term and key topic for me. What are some of the most common pain indicators that people feel, the situations, when you actually have a chance to convince them to use a product line engineering approach instead of a traditional or not so systematic approach? What are those pain indicators?
The things we see will be, as you start adding more and more products to the portfolio, it becomes extremely more expensive and more difficult every time you add a new product. So you sort of get to a point on an exponential curve where you almost hit the wall. You can add your 16th product, but you can never get to 17 because you're so busy thrashing around on those first 16. So it shows up in the form of defects. So an engineer will go in, fix a defect on one product, and oops, I accidentally broke 2 others as I was doing that because of the entanglement of the diversity. we see things where maybe a company is using a branching technique in configuration management, and they'll notice that engineers are spending all of their time merging across branches within configuration management. So it's sort of wasted overhead, people doing things that don't relate to adding value and adding features to the product. They're just thrashing around trying to manage diversity and variation and just keeping things coordinated.
Now, what kind of domains are best suited for a product line engineering approach? Are there domains like telecommunication, embedded systems, banking, or the like that have been typically and in the past very intense in the usage of product lines? Is product line engineering suited for any kind of domain?
So we haven't seen any limitation in terms of where you can apply the concept. So it's very broad, very horizontal type of concept that applies in all software areas. In terms of adoption, we do find that embedded types of development seem to be more amenable to trying and adopting software product line approaches. And I attribute that to the fact that the notion of product line is so clear when you're working in a domain that has physical devices. So, you get 20 handsets for a cell phone dropped on your desk, and somebody says, write software that runs on all 20 of these different handsets. It's very clear you have a product line problem. Whereas in enterprise software, there are 50 different ways that people will come up with of managing the variability and the diversity, and they don't as clearly see the fact that they do have a product line problem.
Now you have the chance that many people, many developers, many software engineers currently listen to you. Do you have anything that you want to across to this group of people that you always liked to say?
Well, certainly we're at a point now in the field where product lines are well understood. They're proven in practice. I've never seen a case where you go in and do a study and say, oh, you'd be better off not adopting a product line approach. So I think it's to the point now where it will be headed into the mainstream. We're seeing more and more people understanding it, and there's really no reason not to go after it. The benefits are always there. It's very exciting, very challenging, but always very strong benefits come in response to that. So I just encourage people to look very closely at what's available out in the methodologies and the technologies that are emerging, look at those success stories, and find good ways of being one of the first people out there to have another success story.
There is going to happen the Software Product Lines Conference this fall in Japan. What can people learn from that at that conference? What do you suggest how people get into the product lines community, how to get started, how to become potentially a member of the product line engineering community?
So the first 5 years or so of the Software Product Line Conference, it was all researchers and people coming in, and everybody there had their view of how to do product lines. Everybody was speaking, nobody was listening kind of scenario. Very interesting. We learned a lot. But over the last 3 or 4 years, the conference is now becoming dominated by practitioners. And so you'll go there and the hallways are full of practitioners who are there, maybe experienced or maybe brand new, but everybody's there away from work, away from email, away from the phone calls, living, breathing, eating, drinking software product lines. Very way to get deeply immersed, talk to the people who are really making it happen, and it's a great scenario. So I'll see companies who come there for the first time, and then a year later you'll talk to them at the next one, and they'll be doing product line practice and having success. So in terms of deep immersion and really jump-starting a initiative into doing software product lines, it's a great approach.
Great. Any final word, any last word you want to say to our listeners?
Well, I just appreciate the opportunity to get out here and spread the word. That's our mission ultimately, is to get this out into the mainstream. Again, information is out there. Dig in, be one of the early adopters, and I think the field now is at a point where we're seeing very rapid growth, very rapid adoption, and nothing but good things to come.
Great. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Software Engineering Radio. If you want more information about the podcast and all the other episodes, visit our website at se-radio.net. If you want to support us, you can donate to the SE Radio team via the website, or you can advertise for SE Radio, for example, by clicking on the Dig, Reddit, Delicious and Slashdot buttons. To contact the team, please send email to team@seradio.net, or if it's specific to an episode, please use the comments facility on the website so other people can read and react to your comments. This episode of Software Engineering Radio, as well as all other episodes, are licensed under a Creative Commons license. Please see the website for details. Thanks to Charlie Crow and the PodSafe Music Network for the music used in this show. The song is called Vegas Hard Rock Shuffle.